Welcome to Torino, welcome to IUC. Thank you for being with us. This is a very preliminary and tentative happening. It's a very unstructured process, the one that we are starting this morning, which has started with a formal act by a town in southern Italy, which is Naples, whose municipality has passed in the last summer a resolution to start a process of, from the bottom up, a process of development of something in the nature of a European Charter of the Commons. It is quite important to give to you guys a little bit of the political context of this event, because we do not believe at IUC that we can approach any legal issue, such as the production of a legal document, without a full understanding of the context in which the law is produced and in which the law is actually to be developed. So this idea of the commons, which has been around for quite a long time, in a variety of academic and political environments, which had its first political victories in Latin America and not in the West, which is something that's extremely important to keep in mind all the time. In Italy, received a major acceleration last year with a referendum process against the attempt privatization of the water supply system. That referendum happened in a very particular moment for the Italian political situation. That was the final phase, I would say, of a long regime headed by Mr. Berlusconi, whose last acts were actually brutal attempts to privatize as much as possible of the commons that were around. In the last spring, the Italian people have started to understand for the first time that privatization is not the solution for the problems of organization of society, but actually privatization can be one of the problems, because it is a process of concentration of resources in a very limited number of hands, mostly corporate hands, whose target is that of extracting profit from social cooperation. For a long time, after the Thatcher-Reagan so-called revolution, it became almost a commonplace to say that government is not the solution, is the problem. And now we can say that privatization also is not the solution, is many times the problem. But yet, a return to government as such cannot be considered a promising strategy for the development of a better world. Actually, both government and privatized capital are organized around the same logic, which is a logic of hierarchy and the logic of exclusion. The notion of the commons, on the other hand, is based on non-hierarchical relationship, on access, and of participation in the governance of the public resources. Okay, so this is the intellectual background. In Naples, there was a political victory of an administration that was alternative to both the political parties that are represented today in the Italian parliament, and against any of a mayor one that ran on a platform of the commons. His first act, right after his election, was to organize a local ministry for the commons and public participation in order to try to open up the political space of Naples, not only to elected officials, but also to the people self-organized in a variety of local assemblies. Okay? So, among the things that have been done at the beginning, there has been a bill to republicize the public water supply, the water supply system, with the creation of a public company called ABC, Acqua Bene Comune, Naples, whose bylaws are based on the principles of the commons and of participation in the government. So that was the first important practical decision that was taken by the municipality of Naples. And another decision was that of launch from the bottom up within a network of cities and a network of institutions that want and try to put the commons at the center of the future political and legal agenda of a process called the Charter of the Commons. And you all received the actual deliberation of the municipality. This conference is a first moment in which we try to discuss here at IUC what would be the sense of a political operation like that, and how such a political operation, which has as a result a legal document, should be carried on. It is very important for us to start to discuss it here, not just for the institutional pride or anything like that. We don't have that kind of disease, but for the fact that I have experienced over time, since the beginning of the AUC, that whenever I have an idea and I have a chance to discuss it and to share it with the students here, because of the special composition of the student body, coming from really a large number of backgrounds in geography, in culture, in all sorts of things, the insights that emerge from these discussions are always extremely original and very useful for me to try to avoid the sin of being captured within my mental box. Okay? So we are trying here to start this process really thinking outside the box, even if a box is present. Okay? So we are beginning a process that is currently regulated by European law, but that has not been tried yet, because the process right now is not completed entirely. Okay? And this process is called the Citizens Initiative. Okay? Now, the Citizens Initiative is basically a small piece of political participation of the people of Europe in an institutional setting, that of current Europe, that is severely affected by a lack of democracy disease. This has been discussed in many places and is not going to be part of our discussion. However, you should know and you should keep in mind that the fundamental constitutional structure of the European system today grants to the Commission a monopoly on the initiation of legislation. In other words, the Commission, which is a body of non-elected officials, the bureaucratic government of Europe, if I can use this term, and is actually entrusted with a full power of initiative. If the Commission doesn't start legislation, legislation doesn't happen. However, in the Treaty of in the Treaty of Lisbon, there is a provision that says that a certain number of European citizens, in the number of 1 million, coming from 1/3 of the member states, that is based from 7 member states, with a minimum participation in each state of a given number of people, which is basically, if I don't remember bad, the number of the parliamentary members multiplied by 750. But Luca Longhi will give us a more detail. Luca Longhi is representing here Alberto Lucarelli and the municipality of Naples. Actually, the mayor of Naples was here yesterday. I spent the evening with him, and he is greeting us and very happy that we're doing this thing. And unfortunately, this morning I tried to have him coming to say hello, but it didn't work out. But anyway, so a number of citizens from a variety of European states can propose to the Commission to propose legislation. So it's an initiative over an initiative. That is to say that it's filtered by a variety of checks to avoid that democracy takes over, basically. No? It is given as a possibility, but it is given with a kind of very worried sense that the people might perhaps take over too much. But we will discuss that. This is my personal take on this point. However, it seems to us that it's worth trying at least once, and trying this with an ambitious idea. And the ambitious idea is not just to propose legislation in some discrete aspect of European law, but it's actually to propose, by means of that initiative, a real somersault in the way in which the political organization in Europe is today carried on. In other words, while Europe today is a highly hierarchical and technocratic system, we are trying by means of introducing a Charter of the Commons to have an actual transformation of the real fabric of Europe by putting at the center the model of the Commons, which we will discuss later, is an actual radical alternative to the current vision of society. So this is pretty much what we are trying to do here. In order to do that, we thought that a charter could not be yet another piece of good intentions written on paper. Okay? Europe and the international institutions are notorious for putting a lot of good intentions on paper. If you read the various declarations on rights, if you read the charters of social rights and all that kind of stuff, and you were coming from another planet, you'd think that the world was a really civilized place. Because you'd see on paper a vision of the world in which people, are respected, are protected, are equal, are granted with rights. You will see a world that in fact doesn't exist. So this number of pieces of paper containing a lot of good intentions is already out there, and it is already something that there will be a huge struggle to do in order to implement what we already have. So the point here is not so much, and looking at things from the Commons, is not so much adding yet another piece of paper containing good intentions, but is actually to begin from the bottom up with a network of cities, a network of activists, a network of people that are concerned about our common future. But not our common future in the sense of the future of Europe only, because there is going to be a lot to say about, the fact that Europe is itself a structure that has to be understood in the light of the commons as an open space, as the most rich market of the West that actually could develop as such just because of the variety of processes of expropriation and plunder of the past centuries. Okay, so we have a big work to do in rethinking Europe, and putting the commons at the center seems to us a good starting point. How to do that? Now, the way that the little piece of paper that I circulated, of which I claim the responsibility, but I'm not at all affectionate to it, and you guys are very welcome to destroy it from the first line to the last, and I will not put any kind of resistance in this destruction against fighting, except from fighting for my ideas when I think that they are worth pursuing, but so that it was just to have something here on the table to start our discussion about. Because it seems to me that it's very important to have basic and structured discussions, but it is always good that at least we have in mind something, that gives some sort of coherence of what we're talking about. So the idea that I envisioned here in the paper was that this process, there is a big issue of legitimacy in Europe going on, okay? And this issue of legitimacy is really kind of at the heart of an analysis of the commons. So we are not entitled to do anything legitimate, to put on paper our own vision, of my own vision, in any different way that some, reactionary guy being the CEO of a big corporation. I mean, that would be illegitimate, his action would be legitimate our action. The point is to produce a legitimate political process that allows the people of Europe as such to express themselves clearly on some fundamental issues. So my idea would be to start by means of the popular initiative, okay, a requirement to the European institutions to allow the European Parliament in 2014. In 2014 we are voting for the European Parliament, and the European Parliament elections are based on a proportional system, so at least there is not this winner takes all ideology that is destroying our democracy in developed countries. So it's a proportional system to vote for a body, which is an impressive political structure that so far is extremely limited in its power. So it seems to me that if we can have the next political parliament voted in a capacity of function as a constituent assembly for producing the Charter of the Commons, so for doing at the political level the kind of action that we propose in the process, we might have, finally, a political campaign for the next European Parliament that is not completely dominated by the local interests. Because so far, the political campaigns of the European Parliament are not European campaigns. There are no European issues discussed. They are just national campaigns on which the local national political parties fight with each other, on local issues, and there is never a discussion that allows the people of Europe to express themselves as such. So it seems to me that the process is important, and the process should aim to guide a future election of the European Parliament with some sort of constitutional capacity authority. Whether we can do that or not, we are at the borders of the initiative, because and here there are some tricky legal issues that our friends that are more learned in European law that we have here from my own university, and they are sitting right here, will address. But we also think that the law is something that has to be forced a little bit. That prudence in the law is as sad as everywhere else, that we need to be bold and courageous in order to make actual transformations happen, and therefore we should challenge the borders of legality in order to have it evolve in a direction that we like. Okay, so this is pretty much what we have here. The day I will leave the floor then to Saki to discuss to tell us something about the agenda of the day. And then, we will have, I know that we have Luca Longhi that is from Naples that has some details to offer us about the actual procedure. Then we could have, maybe this morning we should have a discussion on the practical procedural issues that are involved in this. This afternoon, the discussion should be more about the contents and the idea of the commons and how we can reflect that in a definition, and then tomorrow would be a more kind of political organizational phase. We have a number of organizations that are represented here, and so we can start imagining the building of a network on the existing ones to carry on the process as soon as the things will be ready. That is going to be probably April 2012. But you know, that's what I have to say. Saki, if you have something to add, please.
Okay. So I think the important thing is that we understand this broad topic of the commons within a specific political project. So this is, I think, the point of the first session, is to bring this extremely broad discourse which finds itself, appears in the work of Ostrom, in the work of political economy, in the work of human rights, right? I mean, there's a recognition of the commons within human rights to the extent that they're starting to understand resources like water as a human rights issue. Looking at the anti-globalization movement, the activism, the occupations against neoliberalism that have taken place throughout the world. All of these things are linked to the commons to some extent, in the sense that it's a reclaiming of resources, and fundamentally the reclaiming of resources through participatory governance, through participatory democracy. So it's really two-part. Commons is not only about resources, but it's about the governance of those resources, and at its core, this idea of participatory democracy, which seems to have failed us in the model of between the state and the market, right? The state actors, market actors are collusive, and this is part of the problem. There's a loss of faith in the state as representative of the people. So there are various discourses on the commons, but the idea is to frame it within our specific project, to understand the language, understand the concepts of these various discourses, and how they could be deployed within this specific initiative under the European Citizens Initiative. Okay? So we start, I think, with Luca Longhi, who will tell us a bit about the framework of the European Citizens Initiative. Thank you.
Good morning to everybody. I have prepared with Alberto Lucarelli, the local Minister for Commons of the City of Naples, a little paper who could represent the point of start of the works for today, just to describe the experience of the City of Naples, the concept of commons, and the political project who is in the progress. In accordance with Article 11, Paragraph 4, Treaty of Lisbon, and Article 24, Paragraph 1, the Treaty of Lisbon, and Regulation Number 211/2011, the City of Naples has launched the European Citizen Initiative in the field of commons to propose a legal act of the Union for the purpose of implementing the treaties. The Municipal Resolution number 820, July 21st, who is in the documents. Using the key represented by Article 11, the Treaty of Lisbon, the City of Naples could start a European campaign to affirm, protect and valorize commons within European legal space, helping in this process associations and movements that work on this subject. However, having regard to Article 11, Paragraph 4, Treaty of Lisbon, is necessary to find within European law a legal basis to the notion of common. And there are two possibilities, Mainly, this basis could be formed by Article 14, Treaty of Lisbon, which emphasizes the importance of service of economic general interest in the shared values of the Union and their role in promoting social and territorial cohesion, having regard to the strong link between public utilities, water service, and the object of the service, intended as common good, in this case, the water. Furthest basis could be represented by first and second paragraphs of Article 191, Treaty of Lisbon. Union policy on the environment shall contribute to pursuit of the following objectives: preserving, protecting and improving the quality of the environment, protecting human health, prudent and rational utilization of natural resources, promoting measures at international level to deal with regional or worldwide environmental problems, and in particular combating climate change. Union policy on the environment shall aim at high level of protection, taking into account the diversity of situation in the various regions of the Union. It shall be based on the precautionary principle and on the principle that preventive action should be taken, that environmental damage should as a priority be rectified at source, that the polluter should pay. In this context, harmonization measures answering environmental protection requirements shall include, where appropriate, a safeguard clause allowing member states to take provisional measures for non-economic environmental reasons subject to a procedure of inspection by the Union. Indeed, a legal discipline of commons directly linked to fundamental rights, rivers, for example, lakes and other waters, air, parks, forests and wooded areas, mountains, glaciers and permanent snows, cultural and environmental goods, could find just in the field of environmental law a natural link and an ideal systematic location. From a procedural point of view, it is necessary to involve partners, for example, municipality, but also associations, movements, unions of at least 9 European countries, and start collecting the signatories. From the standpoint of the contents, we could formulate a proposal for a European Charter of the Commons. For example, the politics of European Union aim to protect commons intended as goods that express utilities functional to the exercise of fundamental rights and the free development of the person. The commons must be protected also for the benefit of the future generations. Owners of the commons can be public entities or private persons. In any case, must be ensured their collective use in the condition fixed by law. When owners are public persons, commons are managed by public sector and they are located off the market. Commons are, among others, rivers, lakes and other waters, air, parks, forests and wooded areas, mountain, glaciers and permanent snows, cultural and environmental goods. From a procedural point of view, is necessary also to fix some steps to do to express the next step, the phases to do. At the first is necessary the support of at least 1 million eligible signatories coming from at least 1/4 of all member states. The organizer shall from a citizen committee of at least 7 persons who are residents of at least 7 different member states. The organizer shall designate 1 representative and 1 substitute, the contact person, who shall liaise between the citizen committee and the institution of the Union throughout the procedure, and who shall be mandated to speak and act on behalf of the citizen committee. Then it must to do registration of the proposed citizen initiative, collection of statements of support within a period not exceeding 12 months. Then there is also the possibility to do online collection systems at the Article 6 of the regulatory. Minimum number of signatories per member state expressed into the Annex 1st. Verification and certification by member states of the statement of support within a period not exceeding 3 months from receipt of request. Not later than March 1st, 2012, and this is maybe the principal problem from a practical point of view, because we have also to afford this kind of problem, starting this kind of process. Member states shall forward the names and the addresses of the competent authorities to the Commission, Article 15 of regulatory, because at that moment we don't know exactly who will be the institution for each member state with which we have to talk, to start this process. And this is the first, I think, problem to start the process. But we have, in the same way, decided in Naples to start the process with the municipal regulatory, who is attached into the document, who stayed into the dossier of today, Because it's necessary to start from a political point of view to fix exactly which is the contents, the concept of commons, but at the moment, reading the European regulatory number 211, the first problem is just this, no? The Article 15, that we don't know exactly who will be the interlocutor, no? The institutional actor at the European level and also for each member state.
Okay, thanks a lot. So, I guess that we might. I would like to hear a little bit on the issue, because there were two things on the table here, which it seems to me are preliminary to our work. The fact that the regulation and the article related to the initiative, the Article 11, requires some connection with European law. It's quite broadly stated because it talks about implementation. And in the paper of Longhi and Lucarelli, it seems to me that their idea is to use the notion of public services, of service of general interest, as one of the possibly entries of the regulation, and the other one would be the notion of environmental, the broadly protected environmental provisions. It seems to me that we might also consider, and this is actually something I'm really curious to listen from Alberto from something, whether if we start in the process by requiring some sort of transformations in the regulation granted power to the Parliament. So basically, if we say we want to do that, we want to write down some principles as the people of Europe, and possibly, taking a lot of signatures around that. I think that 1 million signatures online is irrelevant. These kind of things become politically heavy if you get 40, 50 million signatures and there is also some action, some physical action on the ground. Otherwise, it's just like when the Commission takes like the inputs from the stakeholders and the variety of things, it never happens. Nothing. I mean, it's just, but it becomes a relevant political process in the moment in which it's massive and aims to some core points. Now, my question is, be possible to imagine the commons as an idea to limit the scope of the European market? So in other words, the European market has been expanding almost without borders out of, the beginning that was just, having a European space for trade, and then it became, much, much more extended and in a much faster way than how the democratization process worked, okay? So my question is, would that be a connection with European law saying that an implementation of the treaties requires some limits to the market, and limiting the market is itself something that is in the scope and the domain of European law? That would be an open question that I want to pose here. And the second one, is would the Commission has the power to initiate, assuming that we can be very effective in the collection of the signature and all of that. There is a check of the Commission after 100,000 signatures. So basically, what happens is that you begin the process. You just the early registration. I don't think is a problem. You register the thing. You register a committee. Then, after the first 100,000 signatures, the Commission says, "Stop a moment. I will tell you whether this thing is feasible or not, according to the European law," which is similar to the check of the Constitutional Court for the admission of the referendum in Italy, with the difference that in Italy they ask you to take all the signatures first, and also with the difference that in Italy that kind of decision actually is a due process thing. It's an actual case tried in front of the Constitutional Court, whereas here it doesn't look like there is any due process involved. It's like there is someone there that says, well, I don't think that this is admissible, period. If there is no ex ante judicial or quasi-judicial process to decide whether it's admissible or not. which in turn, changes the whole dynamic of the way in which you actually can force the law, because you are a little bit in the hands of the odds over there that we don't know which one they are. So I would like to hear a little bit about this sort of preliminary issues of maybe technical, but not so much European law, because it seems to me that European law is really being structured in a way that is, to say the least, extremely suspicious of democracy. Okay? And therefore it has its own protective strategies against democratization, because otherwise we would have done, the Constitution of Europe in a completely different way. So here is where we are. So I would like to know a little bit more about the positive law that we have to actually face, and then we can, because clearly then we can see into what kind of language we need in order to try to go through that system. So
I'm happy just to say one word on that topic. We were invited by Cycling. We are very happy to be here as European law, international law, let's say, scholars. So Francesco Costanani is particularly on the topic of public services, and he will provide a vision maybe of the possible connection to that aspect of European law. Let me just I am Alberto De Nino, and I teach international law here in Turin, and I've taught also European Union law for several years, also in Cuneo and Alessandria. So we didn't prepare anything, but we are, I think that the point is now just as a sort of brainstorming on that themes, and then we will work on the topic, because the topic is relevant. The topic also, let's say, the procedural aspect of the topic is of absolute relevance. If we want to get something serious and let's say really a shift of paradigm in the European Union law paradigm. So so I will tell something out of the blue, but the idea of Ugo correcting the market is part of the idea of regulating the market, and is of course a good point in way. Of course, we have, when we talk about European Union law, we have the problem of legal basis for action. We have the problem of competencies. This is the old problem. Also, when we talk about human rights in Europe and the Charter for Fundamental Rights in the European Union, the problem is again and ever the problem of competencies of European Union in that field. And so we will have to address that aspect, not, let's say, not overweighting it, because of course now with the fact that the Charter of Fundamental Rights is now part of the primary law of the European Union gives us some help in saying that the matter of competencies are not so difficult as they were in 91, Barriere 91. It's a bit technical, but the point is relevant in my perspective. So I think that maybe also the idea of negative harmonization linked to antitrust law could be a good idea. I got it now, so without without having reflected on the point before. But when Ugo was talking, I just thought, for many years, the idea of harmonization in Europe was made up of negative harmonization. We use the idea of taking something out of the sphere of private and giving it to the sphere of public is a way of resolving also some antitrust law matters. And so it might...
So what you're saying is basically that the direct handling by public institutions of certain kind of activities it basically takes the issues of competition outside of the picture.
Is in a sense is in a complementary approach to that of classical antitrust law.
Okay, what do you mean by negative harmonization? Because there are people
Negative
that are not...
harmonization is that will also explain it, but the idea of we have no rules in order to have common rules. Negative harmonization is something that works with free circulation of goods and so on, and it was a way of saying we have difficulties in harmonizing positive legislation, so the only way of harmonizing is saying that there is no legislation at all. So, so the approach was not building, but not adding or building legislation, but rather destroying it.
But, so leaving an open space to free market.
So we should use it. We should use it in the opposite sense. So it could be, but we will have to work on this point more precisely. But the idea could be we destroy antitrust law by accepting that there is a field, there is a domain in which antitrust law should be harmonized in a negative sense. As we have, so we use the same tool, but for an opposite goal, as negative harmonization was used in the 70s for the free circulation of goods. This could be also an idea, but as I said, it's just a sort of, it's just out of the blue here and now. Of course, the point, and then I will leave to Francesco, the point is, again, the traditional principle of European Union law that is a sort of principle of neutrality of of European Union law in respect to the proprietary logic, and that is, of course, a big point, a big issue. But on that, we will, I think, we will have to work. And then, as the more procedural aspect of the initiative are concerned, I think that Francesco can add some useful elements.
Before giving to him, just to clarify, what you're saying is that, so prima facie, as an international law and European law scholar, because there is some sort of prima facie argument that goes here. Does it look patently absurd? Does it look something that has no clue whatsoever except, you know? So that's I would like to get your prima facie reaction.
So as prima facie reaction, I would not be here if I thought that it's totally absurd.
Okay.
And I think that it is risky, it is challenging, and I also think that we might find useful to connect this idea with the necessary transformation of European Union law, which is, in a sense, caused by the global crisis. So if we have a global rethinking of the paradigm, so it's time also to rethink the functioning of the common market and the idea of antitrust law and the idea and the sphere of public services and the property rules within the union. So we might link, of course it is more political than juridical, but we might link this aspect, and then we will find the ground for a legal basis for action is to be found somewhere. Also environment, of course, and health, and are part and parcel of European Union law. But the point now comes to what can we do? So which kind of legislative of act? Because you were, of course, talking about an act. What kind of act? But then we have the filter of the Commission. We have the problem of understanding whether it can be a legislative act or it should be just something more soft than that. And of course, we have some steps to
Okay. I'm Francesco Samagna. I'm a researcher in EU law at the University of Turin. I'm very pleased to be here, actually. While all you were talking, I was thinking about what was coming out, and I was first try to give an answer to the question that Dorothy raised beforehand. He said, well, thinking about a legislation of the EU that look at the limits of the market can be said to fall within the EU competence, and I would say yes, for sure. There are already a number of decisions by the European Court of Justice in which it said that internal markets is not just free movement of goods and whatsoever, but also protection of those interests that might be affected by the free circulation of goods, services, people. So it's the functioning of the market is also the limit of the market. It's an accepted idea within the EU legal order. This is the first point. The second point, I think we have to think hard about the issue of the competence, because in my mind, what I think is that if we start this kind of initiative that is a very big initiative, and it involves also many people and also financial resources, so we have to think hard about doing something that at least has some chance of succeeding, otherwise there is no point in being here. And I think we don't make the mistake to give the Commission an easy way to get out of the situation. I mean, if we table a proposal that is manifestly unfounded, they have an easy way out. They can say, okay, look, we can't do anything about that because this is totally outside our competence, and so please go back from where you come. But so I think it would be very much useful at this point, thinking also of possible alternatives. I mean, maybe starting from having an initiative that is more narrow in its scope. For instance, I think the thing that you did in Italy, with starting from water, it has a very high political significance, but at the same time, it start a changing process that might lead to a bigger movement, so on and so forth. So I think the idea of starting from the services of general economic interest is a very good idea. At this point, I don't see any other idea that can be as good as this one. Remember that we have Article 14 in the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union. The Article 14 gives a normative competence to the Parliament and the Council to adopt regulation that can rule on the functioning of the services of general economic interest. To be just 2 words on what are these services. First of all, network industries such as energy, gas, but also to a more limited extent water. And then you have also, because this notion is expanding, now you have also health services, social services, and so on and so forth. So it's quite a broad concept. And within this concept, we can work out how to mesh this concept with the concept of the commons. That I'm not totally, I don't see them as perfect synonym, but there are some points in common for that. So I think we can also think of having an initiative that go down to just some of the issues, not all the issues. Otherwise, the risk I see is that the Commission has the first thing the Commission will say is, okay, I don't have any competence, the EU has no competence in that, so we don't do anything. If we tailor an initiative that has strong legal basis, they will have a more difficult time in rejecting this initiative. And at the same time, the idea could have some backing from the Parliament, maybe on a more general level. So you have more narrow and specific legal initiative, but a more political initiative from the Parliament. It can be very useful. I've been involved myself in an initiative of this one with Flair. This is an association that works with Libera. And we're working on a directive on confiscation and social reuse of confiscated assets. So I see how they started to work. And they're doing this double job, on the political level and on the legal level. On the legal level, they have to work also, for instance, we need, if we want to have some chance, we need to establish some contact with the Commission beforehand. I don't think we can go there and say, oh look, this is my proposal, without them having seen the proposal once before. It's very useful. Within the Commission is a very diverse world inside. There are people that are very sensitive and they are very clever, and I think they can also give us some feedback and so on. It doesn't mean that if they say no, we have to stop this, but for sure we have to establish some informal contact with them in order to start a process that also has some chance of succeeding. Otherwise, I have the feeling that this initiative that I think is could be very useful and important, this initiative can be put aside very easily by them. This is my point. And so I think the first thing we have to establish is which kind of act we want to have, because this is prima facie issue, which kind of a regulation, a directive, or non-legal act, but this is not an issue for this initiative, because this initiative is thought only for legal acts, proposal of a legal act. So if we want to go through this process, we have to have in mind a legal act. So basically, a regulation or a directive. Which one could be better? Maybe a directive, but which kind of directive? What we want to ask the state to do? This is
this is extremely useful, but I would like to move a step, because of course, there is a kind of very delicate balance between the possibility to succeed with something, but then it's something useless. Or the possibility of, challenging the borders of the legality and then starting a political process that can be of a constituent nature, which is taking what Alberto was saying before, because we are in a moment of transformation, of crisis of Europe, there is a strong attempt now to put the hands on the European Constitution, basically, and give us some sort of more reactionary structure. If we can put on the table, a different vision of Europe that is actually, rather than being reactionaries on the other side, it seems to be something that might be politically important, but more difficult legal. So there is this little kind of tricky thing. If you want to do a constituent moment of some kind, you cannot only kind of go there obtaining that the Commission recommends the states to run the buses publicly. I don't think that is going to be particularly exciting. It's not something that would be worth being here to do that. Whereas we can easily get probably persuaded the Commission to do something on the buses, but that's not it. So that is something that. So my question now is this: is there a legal act that allows the European legal system to delegate authority to the Parliament to do something? In other words, the take on this thing, which is we want the Parliament to discuss these issues with a constitutional making authority in the next session. Is that something that exists? How would the Parliament's power will be enlarged? Would that be a monopoly of the member states? There can be a role of the Commission to propose that. Would that require then a regulation, an intergovernment regulation? So imagine that there would be a request that says, we don't want to do nothing now, but we want to have the European Parliament, democratically elected in 2014, to actually serve as a European Charter of the Common Making authority. Because we want to have it discussed, politically by people that are legitimate, that have been voted for that after a campaign that was on this particular issue, European-wide. We're spending the money anyway for having the Parliament. Why don't we spend that money for having a Parliament that does something relevant? So that would be pretty much the. Now, would there be a legal basis to do that or not? What would be your idea?
I don't think at the moment there is any legal basis for doing that.
Okay.
The normative power of the Parliament at the moment is just as a co-legislator. It means that it can participate in the Council, that is the body that represents member states. Together with the Council can legislate to adopt a new legal act. Then, if you want to change the treaties, you have basically two ways. A more complicated one that entails the participation of this conference that is composed by the one that wrote the constitutional treaty, in which not only member states participated, but also representatives from the Parliament, the Commission, member states, the national Parliament, where there was Giscard d'Estaing the Convention for the Future of Europe.
And that still exists?
Still exists. If you want to make a radical change, of the treaty, radical change means enlarging the competence of the European Union, modifying the allocation of competence between one member state and the European Union or whatsoever, you have to go through this convention system. Otherwise, if the changes are narrower, are more limited, they can be done but by the European Council, that is the body that represents the head of state and government, and then ratified by all member states. These are the way in which the treaty can be changed. So basically, the Parliament alone cannot change the treaty. This is it's not a constitutional authority. Let's say that.
Okay, and the initiative to do that kind of process of transforming the power of the Parliament is in the hands of the Commission. Who has the
Commission, but the request for having such a convention, this is the body that changed the treaty. Also, member states and also the Parliament can ask for the convention to be convened and then start working. So the Parliament may ask that a process is started, but then it loses the control over the process because it is not an exclusive power.
So, and do you think that the people can ask that the process is started by means of this?
Directly not, but going through the Parliament, they can. If they succeed in having the support of the majority of the parliamentarians, the process can start. But I think the problem here is that member states have still a huge power within this convention. So, for instance, the convention for the constitutional treaty was, it depends on which working group you look at. Because there were working groups that did a very good job, in which there were very high level of participation. Other working groups more politically sensitive.
Yeah, no, but that's another issue. No, but sorry if I bother you on this because I want to have it really clarified. Say that because the European Commission has an authority to initiate a process that would eventually go to the changes of the constitutional treaty, but which will never properly happen, whatever. But my point here is much more narrow, is can we, by having 1 million signatures, provide in front of the European Commission a proposal telling them, initiate that process because we want to arrive to the common?
Because this initiative is just for the adoption of a legislative act.
Legislative act, and that would not be a legislative act?
The request by the Commission to open up the process of reform is not.
Okay, no, it's clear. Okay, so it's because
you
of
can change the system from the inside, and you have to use the initiative, but you have just a derivative law. And probably the idea of public services is a starting point that promising at rebus sic stantibus, and then it might lead to other revolution. Or you can change it from the outside, which is of course something much more intriguing, but much more difficult. And there you have the system of the convention, and so it is a different process from that which was clarified. There is no third way, I would say, but of course we.
In March, they decided to change a treaty an act of the treaty because they need it for doing this European stability financial, this mechanism to give help to member states that have some difficulty with it. And they changed this article only within the European Council, only to the head of the government and member states say, okay, we change it, and then they ratify, all the countries ratify, and they change
so
it.
let's say that there is a third way, which is the Sarkozy way, that is coming back to bilateralism and letting Europe reach back to international law, that is back to international law system. That is, of course, something even more radical than as radical as what we are now trying to do, and the opposite.
Okay, so how are we going to do?
I have some questions for Luca Longhi, because you have had this experience in Napoli of putting together this, working under the Lisbon Treaty in the General Services Clause. So, what we're talking about, what we've been talking about, is this Article 4, the registration, right? And we're talking about Sections B and Sections D. So B being the proposed citizens' initiative does not manifestly fall outside of the framework of the Commission's powers to submit a proposal for a legal act of the Union for the purpose of implementing the treaties. So, what we're talking about is the compatibility, right, of something like this statute, the Commons Charter, with the legal acts of the Union and for the purpose of implementing the treaty. So what has been your experience? Have you looked to the competences of EU attorneys, of people within different fields of law to understand the compatibility of what is being done in Napoli with these legal acts of the Union? This is one. D also says the proposed citizens' initiative is not manifestly contrary to the values of the Union as set out in Article 2, TPU. If you could explain Article 2, TPU, what is meant by that, that would be extremely useful as well.
About the first question, about experience of Naples, so we just in a more large context of initiatives about the commons that Professor Mattei already explained in part of the local, at the first, the institution of local ministry for commons, no? And in this context, in these few months, we have realized a lot of initiative about commons and the other side the participatory democracy, no? And in this context, we also have launched this kind of initiative, no? But we have also added, no, that it's not necessary that this is a process of municipalities, of towns, of cities. Towns, cities, etc. could represent just one way to collect the signatories, no? Because another force fundamental, I think, about this process could be represented by movements, associations, not the society. And for this reason, the city of Naples just took the responsibility to launch this initiative. But I had also with the spirit to open herself to the contribution of all the European legal space about the contents. In fact, we just proposed two possible ways, no, to practice. And the second question was about what?
Article 2, TEU.
Article 2 of the regulatory. Ah?
Treaty on the Function of the European Union. Treaty on the European Union.
Of the treaty.
Treaty on the European Union.
So here we are.
Ah, ok. Sì, perché non ho capito il senso della domanda.
Devo sapere cosa dice l'articolo 2 del Trattato europeo.
Ma quale?
Sono i valori fondamentali, rule of law.
Yeah, which are what are the fundamental values of the European Union?
This in a constitutional perspective, no? In actuation of the contents of the treaties. I think when it's maybe the first time in which I think about this specific question, but I think that the fundamental criterion, fundamental principle on which we think about is always the social and territorial cohesion, no? For this reason, we think about the service, the public utilities, putting in big evidence, in particular, the side about social and territorial cohesion, no? For this reason, I think that Europe can be considered also, not also, I think mainly a space of rights, a space of values, a social Europe, and no more exclusive a Europe of market. For this reason, I think that exists also a Europe of social rights, a Europe in which we have to absolutely give more importance to the social cohesion and to the universal services. Who can use, who is organized, and we can use them in the same way as is possible in all the legal European space. I think these are the principal values about what we can consider, no? Talking about commons and the idea to make the commons accepted into the European law, the European treaties or other European legal sources as I think regulatory more than directive, no? Just to have the absolute la certezza, no? La security, the certain that all the member states could accept this concept without doubt.
Gilda has asked the floor.
I'm working at the Council of Europe. It's not the same as the European Commission, either the Council of Ministers. I am not going to talk on behalf of the European Commission, either of the European Parliament. But I think, being in touch with the governments daily, I think what you have just said who is ready to play the game? What is the meaning of commons? Is there any shared perception among the governments? And my answer will be no, because we have just had a very tough discussion on the European Charter on Shared Social Responsibilities, where we used several times the notion of commons, and there was big debates among the governments, the representatives from the governments, on the meaning of that. So I think, maybe this is common sense. If it can be just a person and not an European official, I think it is important to clarify the concept, the objective. What are we going to ask the governments and the Commission and the Parliament to do? I think this is extremely important. Otherwise, we can have 2 days discussing on if the services of general interest are the framework or the environmental standards, or even the notion of active inclusion that is being, truly used by the Commission to understand the 2020 strategy that is smart, sustainable, and inclusive. So these 3 words are being used by the European Commission as, to path the way to the 2020 searching for results in terms of what is smart growth, what is sustainable, and what is inclusive. And I think these 3 concepts haven't been declined so far. And this is the other thing that it should be considered, to my understanding, is the transformations that are already going on. For instance, on the discussion on the common agricultural policy, I have just discovered that there is some discussion on, allowing the use of land that is not being used for young people to settle there. So there is a complete transformation of the notion of private ownership of the land. If it is not being used, it can be allowed, to new settlers. Maybe money is going to be provided by the common agricultural policy for these young people to start a business in lands that they don't have. So there are several spaces of transformation of the paradigm of property that maybe could be analyzed here. This is, for me, and I think the concept of commons should be refined. The objective of the charter should be refined. We should have, a broader view of what is going on in changing the paradigm, changing the rules of the game. The discussions that are going on at the moment on the common agricultural policies are extremely interesting in this sense. I think so. And then framing maybe the charter as well on this 2020 strategy, using this concept of active inclusion to be declined by active participation, active being member, active citizenship, belonging to through the shared responsibilities for the commons. So I think before discussing, it's important to discuss the legal framework, the changes that should be submitted, to the European legislation that could be previously. It should be among us a common understanding of what we want. And what is first of all, you should make sure that you will be successful, even with something that is limited but successful. Otherwise, mobilizing the people and not having the certainty of being successful, I think it would be a bit dangerous because there is an overuse of participation at the moment among the European citizens, and they mistrust they have no trust in their own power of transformation.
Okay, there's Costanza and there is Silke.
Yeah, I'm still, I think you are quite right. But
Should we introduce ourselves, Costanza?
I'm Costanza Margiotta. I teach in Padua philosophy of law, so I'm not a lawyer. That's why I'm still thinking that some questions on the procedure are important. I think that it's very important, right, in this moment, to know what we can do, and then going into the charter and decide what is this concept of commons, what we mean, etc. Let's start and understand what we can do. So I think that I'm asking to both of you, European law scholars, and it's important because you said that we must be successful, but I think that there are some important procedural questions that we have to keep in mind if we will not be successful. And it's Article 4 at the end, in the case in which we won't be successful. And it says, where it refuses to register a proposed citizens' initiative, the Commission shall inform the organizers of the reasons for such a refusal, and this is the point, of all possible judicial and extrajudicial remedies available to them. So, I mean, even if we are not successful, they have to tell us what, in a judicial, which is much more important, if I can say, because the only way to change something is to go through the European Court of Justice. So I think that if it's possible to know, if you know something about this, it would be important to know what we can do after being unsuccessful. The other thing is, and it's always to you that I ask, of course, I mean, what we propose has to be something that implements the treaties. This is the problem. So we have to find the right article to which to refer to. And my question is, even if I'm not going in the concept of commons, I think that it's very important, but we might do this afterwards. Let's stay on the procedural stuff. The thing is, if right now the European Charter of Fundamental Rights is binding, right? With Lisbon is binding. Why we didn't think of referring, I mean, if we take for, let's say, a broader concept, commons are, we need commons to really can exercise our fundamental rights. Let's say something like this, just to use this. Why we didn't think of making reference, implementing one of how many articles are there in the Nice Charter, I can't remember. Why can't we find one article of this useless charter to use it? I mean, we didn't think about that, but now it's binding, so we can refer to it.
Yeah,
So
it's
let's
binding with some...
But we don't know how much is binding. Let's try to know how much is binding. Only the European Court of Justice can tell us right now how much this charter is binding. So this could be one of the other things that we could think about. And then, of course, I think that the only problem that we won't have is that Article 4, letter D, point 2, I can't remember, the compatibility with Article 2 of TEU, which are the values of the European Union. I mean, we are not illegal, okay? We are inside the rule of law, peace and love. I mean, this I don't think is a problem. The problem is implementing to find the right article. So these are the questions that I ask you, to the scholars.
On the charter, well, also on judicial remedies, because they are related. So far, there is no practice at all, because this regulation will start to work from the 1st April of 2012. So there is no practice at all.
We don't know.
But what I can think about that is that once you receive a refusal by the Commission, and they have first of all to motivate, to give you reason why, and then you can go to the court by saying that this act of the Commission violates your right of participation, that is the right of the Charter. So basically the Charter sometimes it can work. It's not that useful.
No,
Secondly, use the charter as a legal basis for the adoption of legal acts, because you have
No regulation
article,
and no directives.
you have Article 52 that says the charter does not give any legal competence to the European Union.
So
and
we
the
cannot
member state
refer
was
to the-
afraid of that.
Even, but this it says only in the Lisbon Treaty.
It's in the charter. It's Article 52 of the charter.
So, from the beginning, the problem of competences was that the problem with fundamental rights.
But then if
And
we go
when
to
the charter was embodied in the Lisbon Treaty, the caveat, no more competence, no added competence, remains. So it is embodied, but with that limit of not adding competences. Of course, there is a big problem of philosophy of law, the possibility of separating human rights. Of course, there is that big problem. But the legal technique, let's call it, the technique of embodying the Charter of Nice in the Lisbon Treaty was conceived in order to give the idea that now fundamental rights could become binding, but with the same peccato originale, let's call it, with the same original sin that was already in the Charter of Nice when the Charter of Nice was
But if by any chance we have a refusal, he said that we can go to the court making reference to the European Charter of Fundamental Rights.
So it binds ex post and not ex ante.
Ex
The
post
problem is
are
that the
not-
charter, the charter binding the European Union. It says the European Union has to act in accordance with the charter. So if the European Union, in this case the Commission,
It's
acts
against
in a way that is contrary to the charter, you can go in front of the court.
But the Charter is also Article 52 of the Charter.
exactly.
But then you can't say, look, there is the charter and I want to adopt a regulation to implement an article that is within the charter. No, that you can't do that because the European Union, this is choice of member state. Member state didn't want the European Union to adopt a new regulation on right to have. They were
So we cannot use
scared
that.
about the European Union adopting such an act. And so they said no. And they repeated in Article 6 of the Treaty of the European Union, they wrote it again because they wanted to be sure that everybody
So really the smart move would be to have actually two documents. One narrow to try to go through and another to be kicked out in order to sue. That would be a double strategy that would work because
I think it would
so we will have two weapons rather than one. That would be
I think it would be useful to have also a broader political act, maybe adopted by the parliament. I know it would be soft law, non-binding, blah blah blah, but it still could be useful to keep the process.
It could, if I can add, it could be useful to help Europe to refine an identity in a moment in which identity is critical, and so maybe also choosing a different path, not that of a legislative act, which could eventually lead to a charter, as we had the Charter of Fundamental Rights, not binding in Nice, and it was a milestone in any way for European integration. We might also envisage the idea of having a charter of the commons proclaimed, on which we could rebuild the future of Europe in a moment in which the future of Europe is very much controversial.
okay. I have Silke, Marisa, and Beppe that are signed to talk. So Silke.
My name is Silke. I'm working with Common Strategies Group as a commons activist. We are independent. And I'm very glad to be here, but I have to say that this kind of getting immediately into details of European law is challenging for me. But I think it's not fruitful as well. Because basically, if we start thinking about how to use a legal framework which is built upon the idea of exclusion in the market to readdress the whole issue and refound European identity and the European Union, for me it is like using biodiesel to address the CO2 issue. I mean, well, I think we can do two things. Let me go back to my notes. Sorry, challenging. I think when we talk about the commons, it's talking about a deep cultural paradigm shift beyond market and state. And I was somehow puzzled that there was no clear distinction between the public services and the public goods and the commons. And that the commons sometimes were addressed as the resources we have to protect, as if there was a division between the subjects and the objects. That means us and the resources. So if you talk about the commons, you don't talk about the resources, you talk about social relationships. And you talk about how to reproduce social relationships in such a way that nobody is excluded and that resources are sustained or enhanced. We don't talk only about, for instance, resources tied to a certain territory, as you said. I don't think in the commons there is a kind of territorial boundary. Just think of water, aquifers, or think of the cultural commons, which are beyond boundaries. So what we have to challenge is actually to change the very logic of thinking and the very pillars of how law is made. And the only thing I see as useful when we go back and use European law is do what basically the software community did, legal hacking. So I think the only way we can actually use European law as it is, if you don't go for a constitutional process, and with the commons we should go for a constitutional process, not for doing a regulation or initiative and asking the European Commission, as you said, that from now on public buses should be public. That is not what the commons is all about. That would be going back to government, right? So the only thing we can really do when it comes down to using European law to make a change for the common is legal hacking. There was a German professor of economics.
What do you mean? Explain it.
Yeah, exactly. I will just give you one example. Legal hacking is shifting copyright to copyleft. That is legal hacking. But I will give you an example from economy, because our whole economic system is based on the idea of competition, right? Of how did you say? I like that expression of negative harmonization. Exactly. So if we would take the competition law of the European Union, which now is Article 101 of the European Treaty, and this is a proposal of Professor Scherholm, basically legally hacking the competition law and say that externalization meant as cultural, social, and natural resources costs externalization would be seen as and inscribed in the competition law of the European Union as illegal, as unlauter. Unlauter? Unlauter. Illoyal. Yeah. That would be a kind of legal hack that would actually invite people to rethink the whole framework. But in a very, I think that is something we can really do. Legally hacking the existing legal laws we have. But in a very deep sense, I think this initiative is a political process. It's about a cultural paradigm shift. It's about stimulating a huge public debate and making visible that actually the whole legal framework of Europe shocks with the idea of emancipation in the commons, which is not about protecting resources, but it's about our freedom for self-governance.
I enormously appreciate your contribution, and I'm completely, on board with the fact that there is a much broader action to be done in order to rethink the common sense, basically. I still think that even to do the legal hacking that you're talking about, which is basically the counter-hegemonic use of the law in another way, which is something I'm particularly keen in doing. We still need actually to understand and know what is the law as such today that is limiting our action, because it's not limiting our action, it's actually framing our action in such a way that then we can hack it. because there is a bunch of strategic thinking that goes on in playing with the law, which is a very strange animal, and it's a very complex one. And so there is a need actually to tame a little bit this animal and knowing it before action. But another thing that I want to make extremely clear, I personally believe that the way to actually table issues in Europe about property law is not by doing a process of writing a charter, but it's by occupying buildings. Okay, so on this I'm completely thinking that today there is a space and an importance in actual direct activism that is non-legal or unlegal or non-legal yet, which I would call it constituent. Okay, that is enormous and that has nothing. And this thing is not trying to take away that. This is just one of the large variety of actions by which the law needs to be forced to be transformed, and it cannot certainly be the only thing. But here we are dealing with a kind of a more limited project because we're starting the idea, let's try to make this issue of European law that is now available and was not available before working and seeing how far we can go. So it's not that it's a way to normalize the debate or to take off the activists from the radar screen. It's just that we're doing a piece of the homework that I believe should be done, but there is space for other things, and each one of us will interpret and does interpret his own activism in a variety of ways. But just so I wanted to do. So Marisa.
Yes. I would like to start again with the problem of legal basis of our petition, initiative, and our report. Because I think it's not so easy to solve this problem. Maybe we have to understand basically the question is there any hope that somebody takes seriously this proposal? I think we have to accept basically the idea that the idea of commons, the idea of our proposal is absolutely against the idea of free market and liberalism. So it's absolutely against the idea of the European Union. And even the idea of a social market economy that is in the second article of the Lisbon Treaty has nothing to do with the idea of commons. It has only to do with the idea of regulating the market. So it's not so easy to start with this basic point of our Article 2 of the treaty. Also, the idea of the polluter pays principle that Luca mentioned before has nothing to do with the idea of there is not any need for market. Even the pollution principle has to do with the better functioning of the market. So it's not a right legal basis of our action. I don't see the point that I don't know. I would prefer to live outside the idea of antitrust because again, maybe I will not correctly understood your idea of negative harmonization, but I really don't see in which way we can really.
The idea of hacking that was very well.
It's fascinating, but if we really think to write something and somebody can take seriously the proposal, I really don't see this point. I can only see the point that Francesco mentioned before. I mean, we have a European Charter. We are lucky in this moment because we have a European Charter. In the European Charter, there is not only property and freedom, there is only a chapter on the solidarity. And the only hope I think we have is to construct, to build a good argument, starting with the idea of services of public utilities. This is the only point. This is the only way I see for constructing a good argument for the commons. And also because Europe is also a process in construction. So yesterday was speaking about a new treaty and so on. So if we have to start with a new idea, we have to, from my point of view, to focus on only to this idea of services on public utilities. I do not see other points that I have.
Yeah, can I just, that's a very good point. The point, I need another understanding. So when we say it should be linked to a provision of the treaty, do we need to link, let's say that we link it to the provision of the treaty about transportation and public services or whatever. Then, however, we need a language that speaks to the people. You don't need a language that speaks to the bureaucrats only, because this is really, I think, it seems to me something that we have to disempower the bureaucrats. Okay, we have to organize a language that, being legally impeccable, being legally sound, very sound, will not be something that the bureaucrat will like. Okay, so I think if we go through too easily, it's a defeat, it's not a victory. It means we are doing nothing that disturbs. So I'm very sympathetic with Costanza's argument on that there is we should not do something that is blatantly not within the picture, and so we should not try to change the common sense by writing it down, because the common sense is not a charter. The common sense is a pattern of behavior, is a different thing. It's like we were trying to codify the customs of the Africans, during colonization. It didn't have any sense, because the moment you write down something, is not you're already changing its nature in a sense, right? So, but to me there is this point of trying to understand a language, a process, and that then we can bring to a court of law in case and win or make a good argument, and then even the bureaucrats will know that because he has to explain, he cannot kind of take this thing, as if too easily, because there is some movement around it. So so my question, more a little technical, is once we have grounded it, for example, in the clause of public services, do we then have space for introducing a language that actually goes in the direction of rebalancing the private and the public within the constitutional tradition of Europe, in such a way that the public sector has at least the same kind of guarantees that the private sector, and therefore the commons can be protected also by means of the public sector, not only by means of the private sector. I don't know if my point is clear enough. So we get the legal connection, but then in the language of the bill that we propose, the bill is still ours, right? We can still do the bill the way we like and look at the signatures on what we propose, not on what they suggest, right? Is that how it works?
I think it could be feasible. I think that we should use some provisions as Troy horses. So the idea is really starting from the idea of public services, or also from antitrust law. That's why I mentioned antitrust, which is typical of liberalism, but with the idea of negative urbanization, you can tell there is a domain in which antitrust law, the only way of making it working is taking an area of interest aside from the field of application of antitrust.
This is what you have not to mention here, because this is for the market, it's not for something that is outside the market. I mean, for the European Union, as you said before, you can be private, public actor, it does not any sense. But you have to apply the antitrust rules in your acting. I don't see the point of calling the antitrust for this kind
The
of...
idea I had was very well explained by Silke. The idea of hacking the idea of antitrust from inside, by saying that not everything is subject to antitrust rules, and the better way of making antitrust rules function is a negative urbanization.
This is to try to find some limit of the market.
It is more a matter of understanding.
But could we imagine a variety of legal bases? Like, for example, saying, this is a charter by definition is something that has some broad breading, you know, it's not, so we could imagine like a sort of preambulus we say, you know, seeing this provision, seeing that provision, seeing that provision, we believe that there is here a perimeter of action that requires to be constructed now positively and not negatively, and therefore we hereby suggest the following: doom, 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 doom. Yes, so that's possibly a way to include as many. If it was a legal brief, that would be the way you do it, right? You throw all the weapons you have, and then you do what the hell you wanted to do, and then we go back to Gilda saying what we actually want to do, which is something we will discuss.
Also, for instance, in the PAC, the Common Agricultural Policy, very interesting. So if we have some seeds of commons from the inside, it might be much better than trying to.
But there was better than that.
Thanks. I will try to come back to the strategic question posed by Gilda before, because I think that we have to be very clear about strategy before discuss the tactics. And I say something from not an objective, but from a situated point of view. The point of view from which I start my question is which role this open process of the European Charter of the Commons can play for the social movement, the new social movements that in this moment are resisting the dominant, the mainstream management of the crisis, and are trying to set up an alternative to this mainstream management of the crisis. Also, the question is that the radicality of the contents of the draft of the chart is not possible to resolve it inside the legal framework of the present European law. What this draft is proposing to us is what I call a constituent gesture. And a constituent gesture is every time a rapture gesture. It's not possible to set up this constituent gesture inside the present legal framework. That is a legal framework full of apories, full of contradictions. For example, we have an executive power, the European Commission, which is clearly a counterpart of the contents of the Charter, which exercises also the role of constitutional checks about the admissibility of our proposal of European Charter of the Commons. Clearly, this is a contradiction, and the European law is full of this contradiction with the traditional theory of powers division and so on. So we have to take in account that such citizen initiatives enter in something like a fissure, a crack in the European law. That is a sort of homage, a sort of concession to the rhetoric of participatory democracy. But the contents of the European Charter of the Common is not inside the language and the practice of the participatory democracy. Is, as I told, a constituent gesture. An example at point 5, not to discuss the contents, but at point 5, the draft speaks about a true Commonwealth of Europe. And of course, the present constituent framework of the European Union is not a Commonwealth. is not a republic of the commons that the European Charter is proposing. So I think that we have not to be afraid to open a constitutional conflict. Of course, we have to build up a proposal that, using the idea of legal hacking, has to be sustainable in the conflict, in the constitutional conflict. But in the same time, we have not to be afraid of this kind of conflict we can open. Let me paradox. I would be happy if the European Commission refused to admit our proposal. Say this proposal is completely out of the legal framework of the European Union, and we can open in front of the European Court of Justice a conflict and a discussion. Because in this way, a small crack, a small fissure can become a kind of passepartout, a kind of instrument to open a discussion about the constituent process of a European Republic of the Commons we need in this moment. So we have to put together this strategy that is a change of paradigm. Chita's right. We are confronting with an idea of a change of paradigm when we try to affirm the idea of the commons, and the legal tactics we can use to force inside the present legal framework of the European Union these initiatives. And we have not to be afraid of the conflict, and we can be prepared to support this kind of conflict in this discussion.
Yeah. This is an excellent point, and it seems to me that in fact, and this should be really clarified, when we started talking with Alberto Lucarelli about this process, that has been and still is within a context of political mobilization that we've seen happening in Italy around the water referendum under our eyes, and so that we know it's possible. And so we thought that this could be something that could produce the same kind of mobilization around a platform that is radically different from the current state of affairs at the European level, producing that kind of people's networking and mobilization and activism that is the real constitutional power. Right now, I don't believe that the sovereignty belongs anywhere else than to the people actually actively exercising it. And therefore, this thing was, in what Pepe said, an act of counteract, not an act of you say, oh, we are happy with this little possibility that they are, bestowing upon us from the top down. We just want to have a massive mobilization. So that's why I said that 1 million signatures, and even 1 million signatures on the internet, and they are, is not something that is going to move anything. But if we can actually have a process that mobilizes people in the millions discussing these things and approaching with a variety of strategies the need of a radical change in the current pattern of the most important market, the largest market in the world in the moment of the crisis of capitalism, then the meaning is completely different. Okay, so there is not that we started from the legal discussion because we are afraid of the rupture or anything like that. But I think that it is good to start from the legal. We can even finish this morning and say, well, it's really not the point of going through that, and that would be, perfectly, but it seems to me that it's worth exploring, even how narrow it is, But it is very narrow. But all of these buildings, you know, these bureaucratic capitalist buildings, usually are giants with very feeble foundations. Because the moment in which the people know things, you know, they can really transform the things. So it seems to me that, you know, the old building is now shaking, and I imagine this as a possibility to actually make it shake to the point of collapsing and building finally something that is actually a Commonwealth of Europe, which you're saying very well is not out here at the moment. Now there is Saki now. Yeah. Okay.
So I think this is an extremely interesting discussion, and I think what we're understanding is that both this move towards the creation of the Charter is in the effort of getting something through the European Commission, but on the other hand is a counter-hegemonic use of law, right? The legal hacking that you talked about. I think, moreover, the most interesting part is the point that mobilization is really the point, right? It's the mobilization, because that's what the Commons is, right? I mean, who cares if there's a directive from the EU that tells nation states that there should be bottom-up participatory governance of resources? Because in the end, if people are not really engaged and involved, it wasn't a bottom-up move, it won't matter anyway, right? It has to be a bottom-up move, and I think that's really the point. So if we can get it through the European Commission as a proposal of the ECI, what we have is a possibility of creating bottom-up mobilization through nation states in the sense of that they engage, they become aware of the issue, and they become signatories, right? And through this, we can create awareness and mobilization. If it fails, so we're saying even if that fails, we should still pursue it in the sense that it creates a precedent. It's the counter-hegemonic use of law. But what we should still continue, even if it fails, is the mobilization, right? The awareness building, the creation of activist networks throughout Europe, the occupations around Europe, the indignados, the people in Greece. I mean, there are people who are frustrated in a moment of looking for an alternative, and regardless, we should participate in this kind of mobilization. I think it's extremely important to work on legal grounds, because I agree with what everyone is saying, that I think legal hacking does involve full engagement on legal terms, right? So the use of all of the plethora of legal documents that are out there, the EU directives, the EU charters, we have to engage with the language of those and work with the legal language. I also think we can't ignore that property, which is really what we're dealing with when we're talking about the commons, is something outside of the competence of the European Union. It's something that has been one of the areas of law, like family, like criminal law, which has been reserved for the sovereignty of nation states. And the moment in which you start to challenge property law, nation states start to get extremely threatened, right, to some extent. So if you're talking about the transformation of property law, you also need to work on the legal terms of the national constitutions and property law. And I'd like to invite my students, I work together with my students this term on a project of looking specifically at European constitutions to locate articles analogous to the one of Article 41, which in Italy, which is the limitation to private property through social purpose, because this was the basis through which the Rodotà Commission paved the way for a new category of the bene comune, of the common good, right? And we have to also engage on the national level with this language to make people see that it is within their own constitutions. It's not just the top-down imposition of power from the European Union, from Brussels, but that it's actually within their own nation states' constitutions, but it's not being enforced, and that it's actually being co-opted by Brussels, right? Okay, so thank you.
There is Costamagna, then there is Guarnera, then there is Gita again, then there is Vincenzo, then there is John, and then there is Jan. So we have quite a list. What time is it?
Yeah, we're close to 1.
Okay, so I thought 1:30 already.
We're 5 past.
Okay, so let's not take more of this before the break.
Well, one thing, Sandy, I thank Saki for having brought into the discussion the issue of the state, because here it seems that we forgot that in the end the EU did what their member state wanted the EU to be. So if we really want kickstart this constitutional process. I think that this constitutional process can be started only by states. So first of all, we should try to mobilize this participation, first of all, within member states. Otherwise, we can even reach the level of the Commission. The Commission said, okay, your proposal is wonderful. I will bring it in front of the legislator, but who is the EU legislator in the end? It's our member state, the Council, our member state. So if member states are against this, or they don't share this vision, this new paradigm, as someone is calling it, in the end it will ever fail. We have a very nice proposal, even assuming that the Commission will get along with us, but then we don't have anything in hand. And I agree very much with Saki also that I think the value of this initiative is much in the process rather than in the result. And so I think that I wouldn't see very well the idea to pull it down, to let it decide. I think there is a value in starting something, doing something like that. Even if we arrive just to the first, let's say, paragraph, the Commission, they say, no, we don't go. We don't want this to go on, but still there is a value in that because we start thinking, we start making people participate with this idea. So I see that the crack is very narrow. I agree with you, but the constitutional process cannot be started at the EU level, but has to be started at the national level. This is because we forget that the EU, in the end, is still an international organization, and this is a fact that we have to do.
There is Filippo.
Thank you for from Sweden. Yeah, from Sweden actually. I grew up in Italy. I am Italian, but I now live and work in Sweden. So, two caveats here. I'm speaking perhaps very much from a Swedish perspective, and the other one is that I am an eternal optimist. So everything I say should be taken from that perspective. First of all, I perceive a sort of pessimism against the European Union from many parts here. I'm saying I'm very optimistic about the European Union in one sense, that I think that the European Union has accustomed us to surprises about itself. From the very beginning, it was the European Union itself, the court, which transformed what was an international organization to something entirely different. So, the European Union is not against transformation. The European Union has been very much about transformation. It can be transformed in other directions than the expansion of the internal market. That's one point I want to make. The other one, however, is about the strategy that we want to pursue, the general strategy, general view of what we are doing. I think that we need to, first one reflection I would like to hear about, perhaps in the afternoon, is a little bit what Francisco Costamagna said about what we should focus on in this initiative, because of course it's very soothing, it's very interesting as a legal scholar to read this, and it's very convincing for me. The problem is, how sexy is it for the masses in the European Union? I mean, I'm grabbing this from the experience you made, Hugo, with the water struggle in Italy. I mean, it was the water struggle. I mean, it's about water, what we drink, what comes when we open, the valve in our homes. That was what made that thing. I think I was in Sweden, so I read it in the newspapers, but I think that made it sexy to the people, and through that sexiness, sorry if I continue using that silly metaphor, you could get to a broader kind of debate. So the question is, one, should we, in a tactical way, discuss this kind of possibility in a more deeper level, even if it's not that exciting for us as people already in this discussion? And the second thing is, when we approach this subject, this is one tactical move, presenting a proposal. The other one is a broader cultural battle. And one thing that worries me very much is that when you read about commons, you see a lacking participation, with very few exceptions, of legal scholars. I mean, this should be also, perhaps very optimistic also about the role of law, being a lawyer, but we should make it also a discussion about legal concepts. And this means mainly, from my perspective, two concepts. First of all, establishing commons as a legal, as a legal concept, reworking, re-updating, I would say, the concept of ownership, which I think is still in the 19th century, which is not even at the same level as the Constitution. And three, reworking the concept of rule of law, which today is only meant as a protection of the citizens towards the state as the menace par excellence, while instead we see the corporation as an even more menaceful kind of presence. So I think we should, discuss how all these strategies should be developed and how they can work together. Thank you.
Okay, what should we do? I think there is some food ready. We have 4 people to talk. Maybe we should move into the afternoon, the first 4 interventions in the afternoon. That be okay? We break now, so we have the afternoon. We start with Gita, Vincenzo, John, and Jan.
Okay, so we come back at 2:30.
It's much more related to the previous.
Yeah, sure. This is discussion. This is the finishing up of the morning discussion.
At the moment, among the governments, there is the consciousness that the rights are reversible. And I think this is an important point for us, because human rights somehow were the basis of our common well-being. They share the perspective for the future. And in a discussion we had with the governments on this charter on sharing social responsibility, they wanted to erase from the charter the principle of non-reversibility of rights. And I think in this context, where the dignity of the people depends on your own capacity to consume, even to consume access to basics like education, health services. I think we have to be extremely careful into not defining having a definition of commons that highlights inequality in terms of power and access. Commons are not a neutral concept as rights, rights for everybody, you say, universal rights. But in fact, the differentials in access and the differential in power should be addressed when dealing with the issue of commons. It's particularly in this moment where, there is this predisposition to deny universal access or the irreversibility of what we have acquired so far. And that are the product of, enormous efforts and sacrifices of the workers and of the people. So, this is one point that I would like to make. So, carefully on addressing how, for instance, strong and weak people can share the commons, can deal with. The second point I would like to highlight the fact that there are young people at the moment, because of lack of resources, lack of employment, increasing on their needs. I say non-education, employment, and training young people, that's around 20% at the moment, average. Less, of course, in Denmark, more in Turkey. They start using sharing it's a basic concept to build dignity. And I think we have to build on this, and be a bit more open than only certain type of resources, because the youngest, they are sharing their working spaces, they are sharing public spaces, they are sharing housing, they are sharing. And sharing is something that comes often in the language of young people at the moment. So I think we have to build on this, the need of sharing to preserve human dignity, the quality of life, etc. Because sharing is the basis of the commons. And among young people, you know, there is a larger consensus on this issue. Then third, I think for the Commission, there are two things that are at the heart of their discussions at the moment, and should be interesting to know. First of all, somebody told me among the advisors of President Barroso that President Barroso is extremely worried about the indignados. He would like to know what do they want, what do they think about it, what are their visions, their thinking. So, you know, somehow pressure, it's interesting, but to communicate that at a political level, you know, it should be, I think, it should be in the sense a more structured political discourse. Then, the second aspect that worries the Commission at the moment is the fact that people are bearing the consequences of decisions they have never taken. And this is undermining the trust. And I think commons could be presented as well as, you know, this the need to be able to bear the impact of the decisions you have taken, because are the basis for the democratic processes. And the third thing that I think is interesting, and this is the end of this intervention, is that the Commission is extremely, all the efforts they will be making between 2013 and 2020 are on social innovation. But I think you can reverse that. It's not only social innovation to reduce the cost of public services, that is the concept. This is why the concept has been created. But social innovation to preserve and create the commons. And maybe this, it doesn't involve any change in constitutional terms in the legislation, but maybe, you know, in the vision that will be supported, you know, by the Commission and provide a new openness, a new sense to this idea of social innovative Europe.
Okay, very good. So irreversibility is challenged, and it should be certainly part of, we don't want to undermine what was obtained, and that's very important. And the consequences of decision, I guess, has to do with the right to default, right? So that's the way to phrase it legally. And so that's our very good point. So let's hear from Vincenzo.
Yeah. Good morning. Good afternoon. Well, from what I've understood, this first phase of the discussion was more, more kind of strategic, and then we will move on to the content, the issues. But of course, the two levels of the discussions are connected. From what I've understood, this children initiative procedure, you know, in this stage that it goes to the Commission after 100,000 signatures, it seems to me that this might also be seen as an opportunity to adjust it along the way. Maybe, and also when I heard that the Commission must motivate eventually its decision, it could be an interesting mechanism actually, because you start with a proposal and then you have an opportunity to adjust it along the way. But at the same time, we see that the political initiative must be wider, and it can also be more revolutionary, let's say, more in its terms than the strict legal framework of the technical proposal. I see we have a need to choose a theme which is and this choice is crucial, because it must be at one level technically and legally strong and feasible, but on the other side it must be politically appealing, like the colleague used the term sexy before, no? In order to gather wider political consensus that may start something that goes beyond. The theme common goods, ben comuni, has actually become an appealing slogan, but probably is still too vague to be operational. So that's why it's important to keep working on it. But on the other hand, I see it's important not only to focus on the European legislation level, but more on the national constitutional references along the line that Saki mentioned, because this is something that the people might feel closer to their own governance, their own tradition and reality, because Europe is increasing. Maybe at the beginning it was like a dream to leave behind centuries of wars between European countries and so on. But by now it's increasingly being felt as a bureaucracy which is depowering the state and also local, depowering local democracy. So while we see that the issue is, it must be posed at the European level, but we also need to enroot it locally. So I would, along this dualistic line, I ask myself, what lessons can we learn from the Italian experience, the water referendum? I see the water issue was very strong in appeal, but we also now face a new phase of what comes next. After the referendum, what is happening now? What are the concrete proposals and models that there is inevitably there will be a range of diversity that we must think about how we monitor and valorize. One thing that it struck me in when the water referendum debate was still before starting, was that, for example, even within Italy, you had the position of the Lega Nord, which was with the government proposing the legislation to privatize, but at the same time you have local governments by the Lega Nord who were opposed to water privatization, to privatization of water services. And I'm sure this kind of asymmetry between positions was not only was not episodical, and the results of the referendum showed that. So I think we probably need to work more on that. But also, I think it's interesting in the content, probably not in terms of strategy, but in terms of content, to look outside Europe. As was mentioned in the beginning, there were battles and issues on the commons that actually started outside Europe. How this can be seen as a sort of dead end of modernity and of the paradigm and the proposal of the European Union, which was only mostly focused on markets and on the market ideology, that this would be like a continuation of the project of modernity, but it came to a dead end, and so the need for a radical change of paradigm, and look for this, look at also what's happening outside Europe. For example, one of the issues I see from my Brazilian Latin American experience that is coming up for the next future is carbon. Carbon, the issue of climate change and how it is being appropriated by the market and the neoliberal ideology through the new carbon market. And also another thing that struck me is how the existing legislations and European institutions that we are living within often seem to represent constraints to imagination, to social, cultural creativity, I mean, sometimes it seems that we are afraid of proposing something because within the existing framework we already know we will not go on further. And it's something that struck me because it's radically different from what I experienced in Brazil, for example. Maybe because things are more new or whatever, but there are experiences and instances which are much more open. You have cases where people reivindicate, they have private property and they reivindicate collective property. So it's the other way around from what would be expected in a path to modern emancipation. But it takes place today, and I feel we still don't have the tools and the language to translate these alternatives into something appealing and at the same time viable, and so that's why I think such an initiative as this one is extremely relevant and probably goes forward.
Very good. I think that the point on the sense that is probably shared by many people of Europe, that the European legal system and the European set of the European reality as it's been constructed is progressively more unconstitutional. If compared to the national constitutions, it's very strong. And it goes to what Gilda was saying about, there is a certain acquis of rights that have been reached by struggles of the labor unions in member states that now is kind of dismantled in full or in part because of the European order of priorities. And to yeah. Well, national, it can give and take, but certainly a lot of the political responsibility. Here we are trying to tackle European legislation, and therefore it could be, I think, a good argument to show that some of this stuff that has been going on over there has been going in a direction that would be incompatible with some of the provisions of property law of the European member states, and therefore de facto is intervening in the property law order that is not the competence of Europe to begin with. So that's a point that I think we should keep at some point in mind. Now, John, and then Jan. Yes.
So, I want to just articulate a feeling that I think has been reflected in some ways, but I just want to think about this idea of, like, is it a moment of reversibility, right? And so my thought is that when Iraq was happening, all the legal scholars in London got together and they put together a manifesto, and they argued why the war was illegal. And they constructed a very strong legal argument for it, and they all signed up to it and said it's illegal. And the criticism of that was, well, law is absolutely ambiguous, and of course you can make an argument that it was legal, and it gets back to that old famous line of between equal rights, force decides. So in some ways, my concern is that we replicate that. And the way we do it is, we'll notice we have language of corruption, accountability, responsibility, actual markets versus the excessive markets that have been captured. The idea of access instead of talking about ownership. Public interests, who's the public, right? No, it's working interest, right? And behind this is, the only reason we're here is because there's these masses of people forming who are breaking laws, who are getting arrested, who are standing and building actual political organization on some level where it's not a movement, but it's the building of something that could actually sustain itself over time. So my thought was just, even if we wrote a perfect understanding of everything in the proposal, we can anticipate tactically it won't work, right? Probably you'll get routinized in reports and we'll keep invoking all these things. So my only thought was, maybe if we're tactically trying to create a movement that has a feeling and to really connect with the people, we should take a much harder line and be provocative. We should condemn the law as fundamentally incapable of meeting these needs, right? So we don't invoke it, we just state it clearly that it can't work in its current system. And secondly, maybe we should do different sort of legal activism. Maybe the thing to do would be to start working on not allowing the protesters to be criminalized or evicted, or those sort of like tactical moves to focus on with our legal energy. I say this with incredible reservation, but this was just sort of a feeling.
So you're saying let's do another thing.
No, I think we do this.